Good morning. The 8,954th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in Afghanistan. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Afghanistan, the Islamic Republic of Iran, Pakistan and Uzbekistan to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mrs. Deborah Lyons, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, and Ms. Mahbouba Serai, Afghan Women Human Rights Defender and Executive Director of Afghan Women's Skills Development Center. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 on the agenda. At this meeting, the Secretary General will hear remarks by the Security Council will hear remarks by the Secretary General, as well as briefings by Special Representative Lyons, Ambassador Tirumurti, Permanent Representative of India, in his capacity as Chair of the Security Council Committee, established pursuant to Resolution 1988-2011, and by Mrs. Serai. Recalling the Security Council latest Note 507 on its working methods, I wish to encourage all speakers, both members and non-members of the Council, to deliver their statements in 5 minutes or less. Note 507 also encourages briefers to be succinct and to focus on key issues. In this spirit, briefers are further encouraged to limit their initial remarks to 7 to 10 minutes. Everyone is also encouraged to wear masks at all times, including while delivering remarks. I wish to warmly welcome the Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres. Mr. Secretary General, you have the floor.
Mr. President, rights contained in my upcoming report. I urge this Council to consider these recommendations as this country enters a new chapter in its history. Second, and deeply connected to the first, we need to jumpstart Afghanistan's economy through increased liquidity. We must pull the economy back from the brink. And this means finding ways to free up frozen currency reserves and re-engage Afghanistan's central bank. And it means exploring other ways to rapidly inject liquidity in the economy. The World Bank's Reconstruction Trust Fund for Afghanistan transferred $280 million to UNICEF and the World Food Programme last month. We need the remaining $1.2 billion to be freed up urgently to help Afghanistan's people survive the winter. Time is of the essence. Without action, lives will be lost and despair and extremism will grow. A collapse of the Afghan economy could lead to a massive exodus of people fleeing the country. Our team in Afghanistan stands ready to work with member states and others to establish accountable systems to ensure that funds go to the Afghan people most in need and are not diverted. Third, now is the time for the Taliban to expand opportunity and security for its people and demonstrate a real commitment to be part of the global community. The window for trust building is open, but this trust must be earned. Inside Afghanistan, Afghan and international female aid workers are at work implementing projects, supporting programs, and even leading country operations across the country. They are making the difference on the ground, clearly demonstrating the contribution that women can make when given the opportunity to do so. Unfettered humanitarian access to all regions of the country is vital. At the same time, every effort must be made to build inclusive government institutions in which all Afghans feel represented. Promoting security and fighting terrorism are also crucial. For far too long, the country has been a fertile breeding ground for terrorist groups. If we do not act and help Afghans weather this storm, the region and the world will pay a heavy price. Illicit drug flows and criminal and terrorist networks will increase. Without food, without jobs, without their rights protected, we'll see more Afghans fleeing their homes in search of a better life. I urge the Taliban to work closely with the global community and this Council to suppress the global terrorist threat in Afghanistan and build institutions that promote security. We must prevent the expansion of all terrorist organizations in the country. And just as I appeal to the international community to step up support for the people of Afghanistan, I make an equally urgent plea to the Taliban leadership to recognize and protect fundamental human rights that every person shares. A stable, prosperous, and peaceful Afghanistan is an inclusive Afghanistan, one in which all people can contribute to its future. This must include the rights of women and girls, who are once again being denied their rights to education, employment, and equal justice. This is a tragedy for those women and girls who grew up believing that any dream was within reach and now helplessly watching those dreams slip away. But it is also a collective waste of talent and skills Afghanistan needs as it navigates a precarious future. As a moral imperative and a practical one, all doors must be kept open for women and girls, in schools, in the workplace, in the halls of justice, and across all aspects of public life. Opportunities for a new beginning are rare. We urge the Taliban to seize this moment and garner international trust and goodwill by recognizing and upholding the basic human rights that belong to every girl and woman. Excellencies, in the depths of a frigid Afghan winter, renewal and hope can seem distant. For decades, even centuries, Afghanistan has been unfairly used as a platform for political agendas, geopolitical advantage, ideological dominance, and brutal conflicts and terrorism. As a matter of moral responsibility and regional and global security and prosperity, we cannot abandon the people of Afghanistan. They need peace, they need hope, they need help, and they need it now.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for these valuable introductory remarks. I now give the floor to the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Mrs. Lyons. Mrs. Lyons, we can see you on the screen, so you have the floor. Please.
Thank you so much. Prime Minister and President of the Council, Secretary General, ambassadors, and colleagues. Your participation at this debate today speaks volumes about the continued importance of Afghanistan to the international community, as well as the rising concerns of all of us about the future of this country. And it is indeed a pleasure to be here with my friend, Mahbouba Siraj, and to listen to her important message on behalf of civil society. Mr. President, when Kabul fell to Taliban forces in August, the United Nations made a commitment to stay and deliver, to support the people of Afghanistan at a moment of humanitarian crisis and political uncertainty. A primary focus of our work, with the generous assistance of donors, was to alleviate as much as possible the dire humanitarian situation in the face of this difficult winter. In addition to what the Secretary General has just said on this, I would like to begin with a report of what we were able to achieve. By the end of 2021, as noted by the Secretary General, almost 18 million people have been provided with life-saving assistance, including 10 million people with food assistance and 1.5 million with health care. This compares with 11 million people assisted during 2020, when ongoing drought conditions and the COVID-19 pandemic had already pushed humanitarian workers to exceed their initial planning targets. Last year, more than 2,000 primary and secondary health facilities in all provinces were supported by humanitarian assistance, including 450 tons of imported life-saving health supplies. This expansion of assistance was possible in part due to the improved security situation, and our humanitarian actors were able to access parts of the country that had been inaccessible for years. Mr. President, it is clear from the above how much we have accomplished, but as you all know, humanitarian needs continue to be pressing. The approximately $1 billion that we asked for last year to address the humanitarian crisis now must be supplemented by $4.4 billion in additional humanitarian assistance for 2022, as set out in our recent appeal. But to put this in perspective, this is roughly the same amount that donors spent on the entire operating budget of the government of the Republic in a given year. It is quite simply unsustainable over the long term. Therefore, we have simultaneously been advocating, and will continue to do so, for a relaxation of those sanctions that prevent the full delivery of essential services and that continue to starve the economy of liquidity. Because of the liquidity crisis and the inability of banks to operate, we are facing an extraordinary situation where people have money in the bank, but do not have full access to it to feed their families nor run their businesses. Mr. President and Council members, your adoption of the Humanitarian Exemption Resolution and the issuing of new general licenses by the United States last December provided welcome assurances that facilitated our humanitarian activities. I am also pleased to announce that this afternoon, here in Kabul, we launched our One UN Transitional Engagement Framework for Afghanistan, for which we are seeking an additional $3.6 billion. This brings the total ask for 2022 to $8 billion. But this comprehensive and system-wide strategy introduces a basic human needs pillar that will deliver essential services such as health and education, as well as provide maintenance for community infrastructure and promote livelihoods and social cohesion, with a special emphasis on the socioeconomic needs of women and girls. These investments are designed to prevent a further deterioration of the humanitarian situation and indeed generate a sufficient level of economic stability to reverse the steady increase in poverty rates that we have seen, while ensuring that the critical donor funds are not diverted or misused. And yet we know that donors are understandably reluctant to show more flexibility until they have a better idea of what sort of government the de facto administration intends to create. In fact, many donors were hesitant last fall to engage in ways that might help the de facto authorities consolidate their administration or appear to legitimize the regime. This hesitancy has been temporarily overcome in order to help the Afghan people who are suffering from an extended humanitarian crisis and facing this brutal winter. However, it is clear that donors who face their own domestic constituencies are still not satisfied with the political progress in Afghanistan and are watching closely for more encouraging signals. We hope, therefore, that we will see clear actions, not just announcements, in the next few months that demonstrate the Taliban are committed to a pathway of future engagement with the international community. By pathway, I mean a series of clearly, mutually understood commitments with human rights at the forefront, which would result in Afghanistan rejoining the community of nations by securing domestic legitimacy that aligns with Afghanistan's modern history and the aspirations of its population, its multi-ethnic character, and its traditional Islamic identity. The de facto authorities have taken some steps to function more effectively as a government, including the agreement on a budget fully financed by their own revenues, payment of government salaries, reduced corruption, consistent collection of revenues, successful management of the currency devaluation crisis at the end of last year, and efforts to engage the private sector. The well-organized economic conference they hosted last week was an opportunity to present their economic vision of achieving self-reliance based on private sector-led growth. But we all know for this to happen, private sector needs an end to uncertainty, a stable policy environment, a reliable rule of law framework, and an educated population if it is to truly thrive. With regard to political inclusion, there have been some signs of wider consultation with political and civil society actors. Senior Taliban officials have met with ethnic minority representatives, but to date, there have been no visible results in terms of greater ethnic inclusion in governing structures. The de facto foreign minister met with some former political leaders in Tehran earlier this month, and of course, there was the meeting held over the last few days in Oslo between a high-level Taliban delegation and Afghan civil society actors, including my friend Mahbouba, from inside, civil society actors from inside and outside the country. Their joint communique highlighted, and I quote, that understanding and joint cooperation amongst Afghans are the only solutions to all the problems of Afghanistan, end quote. It is noteworthy that the Taliban delegation widely acknowledged this communique, and now they must act on it. I would also like to take a moment to thank the Prime Minister of Norway and his very capable team for this timely initiative, which we all understand was to not imply legitimacy, but indeed to advance an inclusive dialogue, which it has succeeded to do. On the other hand, and here on the ground, there is compelling evidence of an emerging environment of intimidation and a deterioration in respect for human rights. This suggests that the consolidation of government authority may be leading toward control of the population by fear rather than by understanding and responding to its needs. Afghans now live with different, but no less real, fears than those they faced during decades of war. Despite announcements of general amnesties for those who worked for or defended the former government, we continue to receive credible allegations of killings, enforced disappearances, and other violations that are not being addressed by the judiciary. In addition, we are seeing a growing number of detentions of political opponents, civil society representatives, and those who voice dissent. We note as well the increasing contraction of media space, which is partly for economic reasons, but also due to pressure from de facto authorities to report in ways that are not critical of them. And I must stress to this Council that we remain extremely concerned about the fate of several women activists who were abducted from their homes and have disappeared. No Afghan should live in fear of a knock at their door in the night, and no family should be left to wonder about whereabouts and fate of their loved ones. And so UNAMA is engaging with the de facto authorities on this and other incidents, urging them to investigate such cases, to provide clear information, and to hold perpetrators accountable. We will continue to do so, and I expect that our strong communications with the de facto authorities will indeed lead to results in this area. Mr. President, how can the Taliban demonstrate a clearer commitment to the path of governing based on trust rather than on fear, if that is indeed the path they choose to take? First, it is past time for them to initiate a wider dialogue on the process for national reconciliation. The international community would, of course, support such a process, but it must be initiated and entirely shaped by Afghans within and outside the country. Inclusion, furthermore, should never be seen as an exterior demand, but as a long-standing and required source of domestic legitimacy for such a diverse country, and as entirely critical to ongoing stability. For now, the war has ended, but peace has not yet been consolidated. The current comparative stability is in many ways underpinned by conflict fatigue and by communities and individuals focusing on mere survival. This peace, this stability, is thus fragile and could unravel if measures are not taken to govern in a way that builds trust and accountability and that focuses on the genuine needs of the people, including the need and the right to participate in their government. Second, there is the all-important issue of girls' education. We welcome recent statements by the de facto authority leaders that girls of all ages will be educated nationwide. Some international donors have declared themselves ready to pay financial incentives to Afghan teachers for January and February. But future incentives will likely be determined by whether the de facto authorities deliver on their stated commitments. I am happy to report that UNICEF and the Ministry of Education are having intensive sessions on technical preparations to open schools for all Afghan boys and girls in March. UNAMA also continues to meet with de facto authorities regarding higher education, a vital and often overlooked sector that was particularly dynamic in the past 20 years, but has been devastated by the recent economic crisis. And third, There must be more meaningful actions behind the Taliban's promise to contain terrorist groups in Afghanistan. Since my previous briefing, it appears that the de facto authorities have attempted to constrain the Islamic State's ability to carry out major attacks. And yet, small-scale attacks are still being carried out, particularly against religious minorities. The existence of numerous terrorist groups in Afghanistan remains a broad international and especially regional concern. The desire of the de facto authorities to take on this threat across the board remains to be convincingly demonstrated. And yet, at the same time, a certain amount of realism is required regarding its capacity to do so. So given the common interest in addressing this threat, and if sufficient trust can be established, this could be an area for potential cooperation between the international community and the de facto authorities. A new conversation, a new dialogue on this is warranted. And Mr. President, I would like to take a moment to highlight the cautious but constructive approach regional countries have taken towards Afghanistan since last August. Numerous meetings have been held in various formats as detailed in the Secretary General's report. Of particular note was the recent extraordinary meeting of the foreign ministers of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation hosted by Pakistan in December. The OIC agreed to establish a humanitarian trust fund for Afghanistan and appointed a special envoy. We welcome the increased involvement of the OIC as a truly substantive partner and look forward to their engagement with us and the de facto authority on inclusivity, on human rights, on girls' education, and on a broad set of common issues. I am happy to report to you that I have had a highly productive meeting with the OIC's Special Envoy for Afghanistan, Ambassador Tariq Ali Bahit, and we are preparing together a comprehensive agenda of cooperation. Mr. President, the UN's commitment in August to stay and deliver means we are well positioned now to continue supporting the Afghan people, acting as an enabler of others who are willing to provide additional support, and engaging as a bridge with the de facto authorities on the way forward. As the Secretary General has just noted, he is about to present recommendations on a future political mission in Afghanistan. These are based on a presumed consensus that it is in no one's interest to see a collapse of the current state in Afghanistan, but also that continued engagement with the Taliban can and will lead to progress along a negotiated pathway that delivers for the people of Afghanistan, the region, and the rest of the world. Testing that hypothesis will be our task in the months ahead. Mr. President, thank you again for this opportunity. The debate today and the high level of its participants shows to the people of Afghanistan that their plight is not being ignored. It demonstrates our sincere hopes that the opportunity provided by the current end to the conflict can and will transition to a dignified and responsible peace. Indeed, we look forward to your deliberations on UNAMA's future mandate in the coming weeks, and we trust in your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lyons, for this briefing. Thank you very much. And I'll give the floor to Ambassador Mr. Tirumurti. Tirumurti, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for this opportunity to brief the Security Council on the work of the 1988 Committee, which I am pleased to do in accordance with paragraph 56 of Resolution 2255. I'm also thankful to Special Representative of the Secretary General, Deborah Lyons, and the UNAMA for their support of the work of the 1988 Sanctions Committee and their continuous assistance to the Analytical Support and Sanctions Monitoring Team. I would also like to thank the monitoring team and the Secretariat for their assistance and efforts during the previous year in supporting the work of this committee in relation to events in Afghanistan. Excellencies, as you're aware, the latter half of 2021 saw consequential change in Afghanistan with the Taliban takeover of Kabul in August, the concurrent collapse of the government of Afghanistan, and the humanitarian crisis that followed, as well as the concern over the eroding of human rights and women's rights. These events occurred at a pace few envisioned or expected. Given the fluid situation in Afghanistan and given the negotiations leading to the adoption of Resolution 2611 and 2615, this briefing to the Security Council in accordance with paragraph 56 of the Resolution 2255 has been deferred until now. Excellencies, I would therefore like to begin this briefing on the work and activities of the 1988 Committee and of the monitoring team by recalling that the main goal of the sanctions regime was ultimately to facilitate conditions that promoted dialogue between the Taliban and the Afghan government, and which was furthermore intended to result in a peaceful and stable Afghanistan. Although the events of August 2021 do create a new situation, the need for peace and stability in Afghanistan remains a key goal of this committee. In an effort to support that goal, on the 22nd of December 2021, the 1988 committee extended once again the 3-month travel ban exemption for 14 listed Taliban members to continue attending talks in the interest of promoting peace and stability in Afghanistan. The exemption to the ban will be until 22nd of March 2022 and was accompanied by a decision on this occasion to grant a limited asset-free exemption for the financing of exempted travel. In this regard, I would like to recall that the country hosting the peace and stability talks will be required to report to the committee within 30 days from the date of travel. The committee fully supports the travel ban exemption for listed Taliban to attend talks that are in the interest of promoting the prospect for peace and stability in Afghanistan. I would, however, remind that the travel ban exemption is for this purpose and this purpose only. With the need for further discussions to promote peace and stability also comes the need for further reporting of the activities of the Taliban and those individuals and entities listed under the 1988 sanctions regime in order to ensure compliance with sanction measures. To facilitate this, on 17th December 2021, Resolution 2611 extended the mandate of the monitoring team relating to Taliban for a further year until December 2022. I would highlight to member states that the monitoring team would be more reliant upon information provided to it from outside Afghanistan in 2022. And I would therefore urge all member states officials, including intelligence and security services, to respect the annexes to resolutions and 2611 to consult in confidence with the monitoring team to facilitate the sharing of information and to strengthen implementation of sanctions measures. Excellencies, on 30th November 2021, and pursuant to paragraph 44 of Resolution 2255, the committee invited representatives of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, and the United Nations World Food Programme to brief on the impact of the sanctions regime on the current humanitarian situation in Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover of 15th August. Subsequently, on 22nd December 2021, the Security Council adopted Resolution 2615 concerning the need to facilitate the workings of humanitarian agencies and those institutions involved in supporting the resourcing and financing of critical humanitarian relief efforts in Afghanistan. Resolution 2615 acknowledged the current humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, which emphasized food insecurity and the disproportionate effect the situation was having on women, children, and minorities. The resolution provided clarity to ensure the continuation of the provision of assistance in the future. The Security Council decided that provision of humanitarian assistance and other activities that support basic human needs in Afghanistan are not a violation of paragraph 1A of Resolution 2255, and that the processing and payment of funds, other financial assets, economic resources, and provision of goods and services necessary to ensure the timely delivery of such assistance or to support such activities are permitted. It further decided to review the implementation of this provision after a period of 1 year. It is currently assessed by the United Nations that over 30 listed members of the Taliban now occupy senior cabinet positions, and therefore the Security Council encourages humanitarian providers to use reasonable efforts to minimize the accrual of any benefits, whether as a result of direct provision or diversion, to individuals or entities designated on the 1988 sanctions list. Excellencies, in its latest report for 2021, the monitoring team noted that the ties between the Taliban, largely through the Haqqani network, and the Al-Qaeda and foreign terrorist fighters remain close and are based on ideological alignment and relationships forged through common struggle and intermarriage. The continued presence of ISIL and its activities in Afghanistan remains a matter of our concern. Terrorist attacks have become despicable acts used by this terrorist organization to demonstrate its power and influence in the country and abroad. Lastly, I wish to thank all member states and international bodies who have provided support to the 1988 committee and to the monitoring team in a flexible and amenable manner during the COVID-19 pandemic and corresponding restrictions on foreign travel and meeting engagements. The committee looks forward at this crucial time for Afghanistan to continuing close engagement with UNAMA and with regional states under my chairmanship of the 1988 committee in 2022. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ambassador Tirumourti for his briefing. And I have the pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Mahbouba Sarai. Mrs. Sarai, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, my name is Mahbouba Saraj. I'm an Afghan-American women's rights activist who has been living in Afghanistan since 2003. Over the last 20 years, the people of Afghanistan, especially women and girls, have fought for equality, human rights, inclusive governance, and peace in our country. Yet the hasty exit of the international community from Afghanistan last August has undermined our achievements and dashed our hopes for a democratic nation. The Taliban is once more in control and dismantling our rights daily. Hundreds of thousands of Afghans have been displaced to countries around the world. And today in Afghanistan, women are literally being erased from the public life, down to the beheading of the female mannequins in the shops' windows. My Afghan sisters and I warned the Security Council and broader international community of this possibility for decades. It pains me to be here before you today to affirm this truth. But we will not be silenced. And you have a tremendous responsibility for keeping the promises you have made to us over the years. My statement today will focus on the responsibility of the Security Council, the UN, and the international community for keeping Afghan women's rights front and center throughout all the deliberation on Afghanistan. Mr. President, after 20 years of tasting freedom, working, studying, playing sports, performing music, it has taken less than 6 months to completely dismantle the rights of the women and girls across the country. The majority of Afghanistan girls are banned from secondary school and university. Many women have fled the country who are prisoners in their own homes. Female judges, once celebrated by the international community, are on the run from the very individuals they imprisoned. Women are now required to travel with a mahram or male guardian. This has not only restricted their basic freedom of movement, but their ability to live their lives. It has prevented women from reaching their health appointments, escaping situation of domestic violence, and seeking employment. In a country where millions of Afghan women are widows and the sole breadwinners for their children, this rule is sabotaging families' survivals. While it feels as though the world has given up on Afghanistan and Afghan women, we have not. We are in the streets protesting every day despite the threats, weapons, and the violence. We are fighting for our inclusion, for justice, and for an end to repression of our people. But we need your political support and resources to succeed. We need you to stand by us and ensure that Afghan women are equal partners in making decisions about the future of our country. This includes calling for the Taliban to rescind the Mahram policy and uphold women's freedom of movement, and to ensure we can exercise our right to education, work, and health. Human rights defenders like Tamannaw Zaryab Pariani and Parwana Ibrahim Khail, when you hear that they have been taken from their homes for protesting against the hijab, this means not giving up on asking about the disappearance of Alia Azizi. You cannot be silent about them, and if you claim to support us in this council. Mr. President, we are in the midst of a catastrophic humanitarian crisis since the Taliban's takeover. Hunger and poverty in Afghanistan have skyrocketed. More than half the population needs urgent food assistance at this very moment. Some families have resorted to selling their children or marrying off their girls as young as 9 years to pay for the food and urgent health care. The Taliban's restriction on women aid workers and their systematic dismantling of the country's system to address gender-based violence are endangering women's access to services. Our hospitals lack equipment and medication, including tests for COVID-19. As the humanitarian situation has rapidly deteriorated over the last 5 months, the people of my country have asked what they have done to deserve this, and no one has any answer for them. It is the responsibility of the Security Council, the international community, and the UN to do everything in their power to provide life-saving assistance, to avert further suffering. Aid must reach all Afghans, including women, minorities, and other marginalized groups. All humanitarian workers, including women, must be able to carry out their work freely and without fear of reprisal. Further, you must continue to ensure that humanitarian assistance goes directly to principled humanitarian organizations and local organizations operating on the ground, and not routed through the Taliban. Women's organizations in Afghanistan must be consulted on all aspects of this humanitarian operation. Mr. President, while humanitarian assistance is critical to managing short-term needs, the collapsing banking system and economy must also be addressed. Presently, ordinary Afghans who need to withdraw money must wait for hours before collecting what small amount has been permitted that day. The price of food staples continue to rise. Afghans have lost 500,000 jobs since August, which disproportionately impacts women. The massive brain drain prompted by the Taliban takeover has left the country without enough qualified workers. Even if the banking system restarts and supply chain demands are addressed, women's engagement in the workforce will be critical to the success of Afghanistan's economy. We were taxpayers, breadwinners, and innovators, all critical for the country's prosperity. In fact, Restricting a woman's right to work could cost the Afghan economy up to $1 billion of its GDP. And although the Taliban doesn't support our right to work outside the home, the majority of the Afghans do. The international community must protect this right, dedicate funds to supporting us, and engage us as partners in developing solutions to the current crisis. This brings me to my final but most important point. The people of Afghanistan, especially its women, see the dilemma the world currently faces regarding how to engage with the Taliban while addressing the present urgent needs of